In 1913, American industrialist Henry Ford invented and implemented the modern-day assembly line. This assembly line allowed Ford Motor Company to reduce the average amount of time it took to create a car from 12 hours down to just over 93 minutes. This also allowed Ford to create cars in larger quantities and at a lower cost. So how does an invention that took place over 110 years ago factor into small businesses today? Let's get into it. Welcome back to episode 3 of Theory of Why. My name is Rob Johnson, and on today's show, we want to talk about how this assembly line concept plays into small businesses. And I think a really helpful anecdote is a recent talk that I gave to a group of high school students at Brighton High School. And during the Q&A session of our conversation, there was 2 questions that I think pair really well with this topic. And one of the students had asked me, what's the best advice I have for someone who's getting ready to start their own business? And another student asked me, is it really necessary to create a business plan before you get started? And to answer both of those questions, obviously a business plan is necessary. I don't think a 20-page business plan is necessary. I think you need to have a really good overview of what you're doing in terms of what you're selling, how you're going to scale the company, what your baseline expenses are going to be, and then obviously how are you going to market that product and attract new business. So a business plan needs to answer those things, of course. But referring back to the first question, what's the best advice I have for someone who wants to start their own business? And whenever you do a business 101 class, you'll hear about the 7 P's of marketing and all of these theoretical concepts you need to think about. But as I've been in this entrepreneurial game for some time now, I've realized that for me, anytime I'm consulting a startup business or assessing a seasoned business, there are 3 things that I always put into consideration when I'm evaluating the company. And it's 3 P's. It's people, product, and the process. So I thought it would be good to talk about those first 2 P's really quickly and then spend some time on the final P, which is the process, which relates back to the conversation on the assembly line. So when you start a company, when you get the gears in place to figure out, okay, do I want a sole proprietorship? Do I want an LLC? Do I want a corporation? How am I going to legally structure the company? That's something that you can talk over with a CPA and a lawyer. Most common is an LLC. That gives you a layer of protection between you and your personal assets. So that's just some very general structural things. But as you actually get into the meat of the business, you want to think about the people. What type of people, what type of positions do I need to make this company successful? And a really good question to think about is, how are you going to know when it's time to hire somebody? What revenue marker or milestone are you going to point to say it is now time to hire person X, right? So people need to be thought about a lot. And going back to the conversation on episode 2, which dealt with minimum wage, you need to think about benefits, compensation, like how all of that is going to work in the company as well. The second P is product. And this is obviously, what are you selling? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it B2B? So is it business to business, or is it business to consumer? And it might be a hybrid of both. For example, Amazon is both a B2B and a B2C company. They sell cloud computing to businesses with AWS, and they obviously sell a lot of things to a lot of consumers through their typical Amazon.com marketplace. So you have to know what you're selling. Now, the people and the product are things that I'm going to focus a little bit more on, because I'm going to do a full episode on these 3 Ps in much fuller length. But I thought it'd be appropriate to talk a little bit about the process. When business owners first get started, and I see this a lot with solopreneurs that aren't backed by venture capital, they don't have a ton of money behind them. They're just really grassroots and getting started. The biggest trap I see business owners fall into is as they scale up the company, they maintain the solopreneur mindset that got them started. And this shows itself two ways, internally and externally. And internally, you can refer to this person as, they do it all. They're the chief cook, bottle washer. They have every single role that you would think of in a company. They do HR, payroll. They're the CEO and the laborer, right? They do everything. And when you start a company, it makes sense in some respects to do all of that because you're limited on your resources. That's what I did. So for the first year, I did the taxes for the business. I ran payroll. I did it all. And that was because I didn't have the financial means to hire each and every department. Where business owners miss a lot is they don't think about the cost-benefit analysis of hiring a tax person, hiring a payroll person, even if it's fractional, even if it's a third-party vendor, right? These things do cost money, but that money that you're spending on those things enables you to go and sell more of your product or find higher quality people. So as you're going along in this business roadmap, you might spend 3, 6, 9 months being, a one-man band. And then as time goes on, you need to recognize, okay, I can invest in a accountant because they're going to take all of this off of me and give me a layer of protection from the federal and state government to make sure I'm actually filing my business taxes right. And that's something you should do year one. If I could go back and change one thing in my business, I would not have been the person that filed taxes the first 2 years, actually. The last 3 years of our filings, we've had a proper CPA, and that's been a game changer. And had I have had the right person in place, I would have seen some efficiencies, some other deductions I could have taken advantage of, and I would have gotten my time back to invest more in what it is I do, which is not tax and accounting, not at all. So that is one thing that could have been accelerated, and that is one thing business owners ought to do right from the beginning. But as you're going along in this journey, internally, we're still talking on here, you need to understand at what point you can hand things off to other people. And this says a lot about how a business owner trusts the people on their team, whether they're vendors, third-party folks, or they're people inside the company. Can you hand things off to other people so then you can continue to scale the company? And this is one thing that puzzles me whenever I see a company that's been around for 20, 25 years and they have 3 people. They've had the same 3 people or a combination of 3 people throughout that entire 25-year history. And that's because of one of 2 reasons. One, they purposefully want to stay small because that's what they like, that's what they're comfortable with, and that's what makes them happy, and that's awesome. If that's you, if you want a small team forever and that's how you like operating, that's great. As long as there's a purpose behind that, I think that's fantastic. What I see more commonly, though, is there's 3 people and they can't figure out how to grow. And more often than not, the reason that they cannot grow is because the business owner isn't willing to turn things over to other people. They're not willing to delegate. They're not willing to let other people take risks and fail and learn through that failure. And that was one thing here that I did right from the beginning, was get people on the team, turn things over to them, and take some risks in that category, because as the business grows, people need to talk, like our clients need to talk to more people than just me. So as we go back to the assembly line, when you look at the structure of an assembly line, and obviously the first iteration of this, obviously it was version 1. It's not the assembly line that you see now at Ford and GM and Mopar, and you don't have that level of technology back then, but the fundamentals have always been the same. You have conveyor belts, you have automation that puts things into place for you that you don't have to do manually. And in the modern day business, even if you're not a manufacturer. It doesn't matter if you're an accountant, a creative, a roofer. There are automation pieces that you can put in place to make things easier. One of the most common tools that business owners use for automation is QuickBooks. You're not mailing invoices through the post office. You're usually sending it through email. You have automated emails that go out when people don't pay you. So there are some things that are pretty commonsensical that business owners automate. But there are things that I think business owners ought to automate more. And that would be things like data collection. The majority of small business owners don't manage a CRM, a customer relationship tool, where you can track names and email addresses of vendors and customers. And this is really helpful for a couple of reasons. One, if you launch a new product, you have an active list of people who know who you are that you can sell that product to. Number two, you have a really good database of customers and resources that you can pull from if you have an event, or if you're doing something for a nonprofit, or if you're doing something just that's community driven. All that information is valuable, whether you're going to do a new line item where you're going to sell something, or you're going to try and do an event in the community. These CRMs are super important for small businesses, but a lot of times they're overlooked and not used. That is one thing that you can do from an automation perspective when you're collecting all of this data for new customers. You can put that right into a CRM, and there's tools out there that will do it for you. There's Salesforce, Pipedrive, Zoho, CRM. There's a lot of, you just search CRM and you'll get bombarded with more ads than you care about. But it's really important for business owners to think about the long-term play in their company. One really helpful thing that I do that may or may not be helpful for you if you're in the middle of a problem is whatever problem I have in front of me, I multiply it by 10. Or whatever tool that I'm testing, I multiply what I need currently as a capacity by 10, and I see if it can hold that particular bandwidth. Because my goal as a business for me is not to always be a 10-person creative agency. I want to be a 100-person creative agency. So do the tools and software packages that I currently leverage, do they meet that standard? Can they hold that bandwidth? Do our internal processes make sense when scaled by 10, or do they need to be modified? It's a really good exercise that I put myself and my leadership team through to think about problems at a much larger scale than what we're dealing with them on, right? Does it make sense for one person to always handle something as small as vacation approvals? Well, no, because if you have 100 employees, they're managing 99 different requests at any given time throughout the year. So those are just things you have to think about that can help you grow and scale. And this assembly line metaphor is really helpful because you need to treat your business as a very smooth, uninterrupted, seamless process. And the question is, how do you go from start to that process? And like anything else, you have to build those components into it. You have to think about the customer experience. Now we're getting over into the external side of this. So we talked internally about how solopreneurs can be HR, payroll, they do it all. Externally, one of the traps business owners fall into is they try to be everything to everybody. And this is a really common problem. So, and I'll give you an example. So when we started the company, I offered websites and social media. That was largely it. As people found out that I did more and more, I got asked to do, you can do QuickBooks. Can you help consult with our company on QuickBooks? Can you help put us in can you help put us into a different software package and consult on, software acquisition? And in the beginning, I said yes to those things. I said, yeah, of course we can do that. Yeah, of course. And then as time went on, and it didn't take very long for me to figure this out, that the more things I said yes to that were outside of the scope of the business, the slower it made our growth. And that's because I couldn't focus on everything and be a specialist in everything. So now fast forward, 4 or 5 years, there's 5 verticals that we do. It's consulting, podcasting, web, video, and creative. If it doesn't fall into those 5 pieces, we don't do it. So there's no financial setup. There's no QuickBooks administration. There's a lot of things that we get asked to do all the time that I say no to. It would make us more money, but in the long term, it wouldn't work out for us because now I'm inventing new processes for the team to follow. And the larger a company gets, the more processes you have in place, the longer it takes to turn the boat, so to speak. You can turn a rowboat pretty quick, but it takes much longer to turn a cruise ship. And that is the same with a business. The larger it gets, the harder and longer it is to make those turns and to make those changes. So it pays to think about these problems well in advance. And some people might say, well, you're thinking too much into the future. Well, you don't want to be in a position where all you're thinking about is 10 years down the road. But as you're considering things that you're going to roll out to your company now, it absolutely pays to think about, can this software grow with us? Can this process scale? Does our payroll system, does it cap out at a certain number? Does it get more expensive? Is it only for businesses that are 1 to 10 people? And that's something that I think about regularly. And we're getting ready to make a pretty big software tech stack change here in preparation for growth. And that's something that we can't shy away from as a business is change. Anyone that is against change isn't going to be around terribly long because, things change all the time. On the Brighton Chamber podcast that I host, we just had a tech company, and they've been around the Brighton area since the late 80s. And in technology and in managed software and managed systems, there's been so much that's changed in the last 30 years. And they've stuck around because every time there's been a system change, they have embraced it and they've wanted to grow with it. They wanted, in her words, she wanted to grow with her clients. So they were always surveying what's important to them and how can they help. And that means changing an awful lot. And if you're against doing that, you're going to be in a real bad situation. So going back to 1913, as these new automakers entered into the marketplace over the next 20, 30 years, if someone was like, hey, you know what? The assembly line sounds great, but we can do a lot more quality control if we just do it manually. Okay. Well, now we're looking at the difference between producing 1 car in 12 hours and 1 car in just over an hour and a half. And as time goes on, you can bet those numbers sped up. So the person that's doing it manually is going to get left behind because they're not willing to embrace the change. And what's cool about that is when you embrace the change, you can make your own modifications to that process. It's not as though everyone is still using the exact same process Henry Ford put in place in 1913. You can bet they're not. One of the things I was researching and something Johnny and I were talking about before the show started was a common myth is that Henry Ford invented the automobile. In actuality, it was done, about 30 years before the assembly line came into place by a gentleman named Carl Benz, of the namesake of Mercedes-Benz. He was one of the original architects of what went on to be known as the DMG Corporation. And that was in 1885. But even though he was the first one to invent the automobile and come up with that concept, that didn't then go on to him creating the processes to make it more efficient, right? So you can have someone that can create a great idea, and then you can have someone like Henry Ford come along and say, I know how to make this process faster and better. And then you can bet on down the line, someone came along and said, I know how to take Henry Ford's assembly line concept and make it better. And that's what this whole game is about, especially in business, is how do we make ideas more efficient, more effective? How do we make it better? Think about project management software. There's over 30 different top-tier vendors in the marketplace. Why isn't there a monopoly on project management software? It's because every single company has a different makeup, different complexities, and different software speaks to different organizations. Same can be said with how a business is scaled and structured. It all doesn't need to be done the exact same way. And that's one of the reasons why, I've had a lot of internal discussions about this, about how much information at Wayne Media we put out online, because you can go to our website, see how much we charge, see what our process is. You can listen to podcasts about how I started the company. And not for 1 minute have I ever been worried about somebody copying us, because it takes a lot more to grow a company than to just copy and paste some website information. There's a lot of internal components that you need to have correct in order to get it done the right way. And if you don't have those things in place, you can say that you do things all day long, and you can probably get some business from that, but you're not going to retain that business. You're not going to be able to hold on to it unless the internal process matches what it is you're selling. And that's why I mentioned the 3 Ps at the top of this, because when you look at people, product, and process, all 3 of those things need to be developed individually and developed well. But if all 3 of those things don't work together, you're not going to have a business. If the message that you're giving to your customers isn't the same message that you're giving internally to your people, you're going to have a fracture. You're going to have a divide. And if your process doesn't help fuel both external business and move along your internal employees, you're going to have problems. You're going to have friction there. So all 3 of those things need to work in unison with each other. They can't all be developed individually and left on an island. They all need to talk to each other. That's what makes a good business. That's what makes a business scale, is when the people, the process, and the product all work in harmony with each other. At least that's what I've discovered. So what makes a business successful? What is the common answer, right? And I think a lot of people, when polled, will say that the reason that their business was able to scale was it was fueled by great people. When you have the right players in the organization, it can help make things go a lot faster. And we've talked a little bit in episode 1 about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and that balance. You have someone who is an innovator, someone who has a fever for disrupting the marketplace, and that is Steve Jobs. And then you have someone with the technical expertise that can put that vision to paper and execute, and that's a Wozniak. And companies are fueled and ran by people that have those trade-offs. One of the best books I've ever read, and it's less than 100 pages. I think it's like $5 on Amazon. It's written by Mark Cuban. It's called The Sport of Business. And I've said probably 100 times that book was more valuable than my entire MBA, because he had so many great lessons in there. And one of the lessons that I learned in that book was, as a business owner, the first thing you need to do is identify what you suck at. What are you terrible at that you need to have someone else come into the picture to help you with? So in Mark Cuban's case, if I'm getting this right, he was someone who obviously had a lot of ideas, could go to market really quickly, but he was not organized. He needed a great administrator. He needed someone that could help him stay organized, cared about the numbers, and could help keep him straight on that. And he recognized that weakness, and he always built his team around his weaknesses. I think that is a critical thing for a business owner to assess, is what are you not great at? What are the first things that you need to help compensate you for the things that you're lacking in? And that's what makes a great team. And we have the same thing here at Wayne Media. We have a lot of key players that are excellent at things that I am not excellent at. And that's what makes us all work so well together, is that everyone understands what lane they're supposed to operate in and what lanes they shouldn't be operating in. And that's more for me than anything. You don't want me to be, the main person doing everything in the company or the subject matter expert on everything in the company, because that means we're never going to progress beyond what I know. And that's not a good place to be in. You don't want to be the expert on everything in the company, because that means people aren't being trained well. You're not building a leadership protocol. You're not putting people in a place to advance. And that means your company won't advance beyond yourself, which for me, would be a problem, because one of my biggest goals is for the company to be able to outlive me and to create a legacy that goes far beyond what I know and what I did. So when you think about, having a company have long-term success, the main component in that is the people. And all of that is built around, what you're selling, which is the product, and then how you're going to market and keeping it organized, which is the process. All right, so transitioning to our leadership quote of the week. So I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about a quote from our man Henry Ford here. So this is a really common one. This is one that I think, people have probably seen time and time again, but I thought it'd be good to just dive into it just really briefly. It's whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And this speaks a lot to just the mindset, the attitude of achieving success, and how our beliefs can either help us or hinder us. So I'm sure we've all seen the people that are like, I can't do this. I'm not the right person for this. I shouldn't be doing this. And they say, well, therefore, I'm just going to give up and quit. Right? And I was listening to a talk that Jordan Peterson gave to a group of university students recently. And he talked about how, there was a student in his class that had spent 4 years working very, very hard on their degree path. I think it was in psychology. And they got one bad grade their senior year. And they said, you know what, this isn't for me. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to quit. And he said, okay. He said, well, what were the last 4 years about then? Why did you put in all of this work and all of this dedication just to get deterred by one thing that didn't go the way that you wanted? And there's a lot of value in taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture and looking at everything that you've put in place to get to where you are right now. And when you look at this quote on the surface, it can be, you can say, oh, this is just kind of a feel-good quote, or, it's some empty motivation, but your mindset in doing things does say a lot about what you can and can't accomplish. What do you think about that quote, Johnny?
I like that quote. And that's a, where you're heading into this now is something that, during my career, I always tell people, and I'll use Todd Kerr as a great example of this, is, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. There's too much to learn. Right. And he's just like, well, hey, just learn something the next day, a week from now. Don't concentrate on what you still don't know. Look back at what you learned in the last week. And now tell me, can I not do it? Because you just showed 3 things that you're able to do now that you weren't able to before. What's going to happen in week 2, week 3, week 4, right? And I've had that discussion with a lot of people before is, don't always be looking forward to what you don't, but look forward backwards of what you know now that you didn't, right? Don't scare yourself into not being able to do it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's like anything else. It's like, well, how am I going to eat this elephant? Well, we're going to do it,
You get one bite at a time. Yep. That's a good analogy right there. That's perfect of what I was talking about. One bite at a time.
Yeah. And that's anything. And we have this a lot here where we might have someone that's overwhelmed or they're struggling with, I got this giant list of responsibilities I have to do. And it's like, well, let's break it into sections. Let's prioritize it. What do you need to get done first? What do you need to get done second? What can someone else on the team help you with? And as you start to break it down into pieces, it starts to feel a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
And the list that you thought was overwhelming and daunting is suddenly very manageable.
Yep. Because you only got to eat one leg because there's 3 other guys eating the other ones.
Right. Hashtag cannibalism.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely true. And that it speaks to the mindset of like, there's been, I've been certainly overwhelmed a lot in this business as I've been getting it started. And the thing that always helps me is I always call them buckets. I put it into buckets. This is my priority bucket. This is it can absolutely wait, but it's important to me bucket, and you just keep going back and forth as you divide things up, and it starts to feel a lot more manageable. So lastly, I want to talk about our proverb of the week. And this speaks to me a lot about community and why it's important not to live in isolationism and to have really good people on your team and people that you can trust and rely on. And this comes from Proverbs 12:25. It says, "Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad." And there's a lot of times in kind of going back to the Henry Ford quote where you might be really down on yourself and thinking, I can't do this. I'm struggling. I'm having a really difficult time. And it does help to have people in your life that can be encouraging and motivational as you're going through, this business journey, because it can feel lonely. Talking to the entrepreneurs and CEOs now, if you're at the top of the company, it can feel absolutely, isolated sometimes because people just can't really understand what it is you're going through. But there are people out there that absolutely care and understand and can help as you're going through things. And I always think that, anxiety is a symptom of something much bigger and it needs to be addressed. And a lot of times it can be alleviated with, with finding joy from others and in others that are around you. So hopefully that's helpful. And hopefully you enjoyed the show. So this has been episode 3 of Theory of Why. I really want to know what you guys think about this concept, about this show. If you're enjoying it, if you're like, things can be better, I want to hear about it. So you can actually email me directly at rob@waynemedia.com for any feedback that you have. And you can also leave a review on any podcasting platform that you happen to be on. So that's it for episode 3. Coming at you next week with episode 4. We're dropping every Wednesday at 5 a.m. If you're an audio listener, also want to tell you that the show is available on video on YouTube. Sometimes we play clips, show little scenes and whatnot. So there's some visual effects that you might want to tune in for. Episode 2, that was we played a couple of clips that might be worth a watch. So hope you guys are enjoying the show, and we'll catch you next week. Take care.